With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And we're back now. My guest, as we can see him there, is Robin Tilbrook, man who knows just about everything, especially the nefarious side of civilization. Robin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me on again.
And we're still on air. We haven't had Ofcom approach you or us yet. The incoming mandatory ID for all children in the UK, that's something to be alarmed about, isn't it?
Well, if you see it in the context of the idea that everybody's got to be have this mandate, mandated electronic ID, then yes, I mean it's just shows how far into sort of overreach and authoritarianism the country has now sunk into.
Can you tell us more about the bill? And it's going through Parliament now, I believe. They say it's for the children's well-being and all that sort of stuff, but it's not really. I think they call it the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Tell us more about it.
Yes, well, you're right. It is been submitted to Parliament. Obviously, the parliamentary process is one where corrections and alterations can be made, and they may yet be. But the cover story is, of course, children's well-being. But I think we need to bear in mind that the state in Britain has not shown itself that interested in children, as is demonstrated by the fact that we've had some people think at least 250,000 girls raped and pimped by Pakistani Muslim child rape gangs, and the authorities have shown very little interest really in controlling that or doing anything positive about it. So when you hear anybody for the British establishment talking about children's safety and so on, everything about that has to be taken with a pinch of salt. And at the same time as this is going on, we've got the Labour government talking up the idea of IDs for everyone on the basis that that's going to do something about mass immigration and illegal immigration. Of course, it's going to do absolutely nothing about it. So poor is the justification for that even Keir Starmer, when he was interviewed about it by the BBC, couldn't come up with a single coherent point that showed that it was worth doing.
I said to myself before you came on, I said, I must be serious. I must not laugh or snigger. And see, I've just broken my promise to myself. So I will go to hell.
You can't help but snigger when you're talking about what the British state is up to, I'm afraid.
Okay, look, this is what I want you to do, Robin, because we're getting a bit loose now. But I would like you to sit there, think about this, just for this very question only. Okay, you are now the Prime Minister. You're Keir Starmer. Just think, think of a goblin. That's what you are, okay? Not normally, just at the moment. So you're now Keir Starmer, and I'm going to ask you the question, how can the digital ID stop people from coming into the UK illegally?
I'm going to do what Keir Starmer did. Sorry, Laura, I'm not sure.
But it's terrible, though, isn't it? Because it truly, it's just like saying, give me all your money or you'll get hit on the head with an asteroid. I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, the same thing with this. It's not going to stop people from coming into, on boats. Oh, we can't go there. We won't get our digital ID, or we will have to have one.
So, Mike, the bizarre thing is that one of the things that we know about the people coming over on the boats is that as they get close to the shore, they chuck their passports and ID and mobile phones and anything else that could possibly identify them overboard. So they are actually deliberately destroying their identity documents. And of course, what we're really dealing with here, I think, isn't actually anything that's aimed at illegal immigrants. It's
No,
aimed at the general population. It's aimed at control of the majority population, the English people.
yeah, I totally agree with you. But yeah, it would be terrible if I was to ask you these questions about parents. Of course, parents being the family unit, being cherished by government and church and all that sort of stuff, communities, that they have the responsibility of their children. They know what's right. I mean, surely parents could opt out if they wanted to.
You might just pulling my leg there, I think. Again. No, I mean the state here is less and less friendly towards parents, more and more controlling about the children, and but it is part of authoritarianism. It's not part of anything that's really interested in the well-being of the children. One of the things, obviously, that parents are perhaps being required to hand over control over by this measure is any ability to veto the kind of things that are now being taught in schools in England about the value of trans and of different sexualities, and this is being taught at a really very young age.
Mm.
I mean, some children at the age of 5 are starting to have teaching along these lines, and that is something that many parents are not happy about and have been protesting about. And I would see this measure as being something that's intended to clamp down on any protests
Mm.
about what the government wants to do with children.
It really is an attack on the West or on the UK, just because we're becoming more specific. If you look at the attack on the family unit, look at the attack on Christianity, look at the attack on your freedoms, the whole basis or foundation of the West, it's not being eroded, it's just being bulldozed very quickly. How do we stop it?
Yes, so I think the first thing we've got to understand is that this is actually part of the agenda of cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism talks about attacking faith, flag, and family. And obviously, the ID cards are about attacking the family and undermining the authority of parents and promoting that of the state to decide what should happen to the children. And you mentioned Christianity. Well, there's been a persistent attack on Christianity for a long time now. And of course, one of the sad things is that one of the entities that seems to be attacking Christianity is the Church of England. We've just had a new Archbishop who was the former Archbishop of London, first woman Archbishop, and when she was being interviewed on, her first interview on being appointed, she doesn't mention faith in God. She talks about the fact that she's a campaigning feminist, that she was a civil servant. She's very strong on diversity, equality, inclusion, and on LGBTQ rights.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly. I'm just thinking if you make sure that if your desire is to know exactly the whereabouts and children doing things and blah blah whatever, how will this work? How are you going to make a child? Are they going to tattoo it on the child's forehead? Your number is X2765443. Because I mean, if you ask a child to have digital ID, I mean, you're talking about children here.
Yeah. Well, you're right, Mike. If you were trying to compare it with any sort of common sense notion, it's crazy.
It's,
But of course, it's not about common sense, and quite a lot of the legislation motivated by cultural Marxist thinking is actually trying to break up the concept of common sense, let alone actually apply common sense. And of course, the family is seen as one of the critical building blocks of society, which they want to destroy.
And you have, and once the digital ID is in for the kiddies, they're going to be, that's forever, isn't it? It's not ever going to disappear. And I just had someone on chat, just a bloke who asked questions, says on chat that it's going to be very hard to travel throughout Europe now because you have to have your digital ID, the biometrics, all sorts of things. I mean, as someone running a political party or political parties, and as a solicitor that fights for people's rights, do you see all these things being eroded? The rights that we have greater surveillance and imposition upon what we were allowed to do, and our future is looking incredibly bleak, isn't it?
I think you're right, Mike. Obviously, the English tradition and the common law tradition was based on the idea that people had, in the American expression, inalienable rights, whereas the European tradition was that of of Roman law, and the Roman law that their systems are based upon is the sort of tyranny of Justinian, because Justinian was the emperor who had Roman law codified, and that's how it came down to us. And he was somebody who his state at that time was an almost complete autocracy, to the point where the most important people in Rome or in Constantinople at the time in Eastern Rome. When the senators came into his presence, they were required to lie flat on the ground with their arms stretched out, prostrate before the emperor. That is the most important people in the empire coming into the presence of the emperor. So you can tell what kind of legal system you're going to have there, and the fundamental philosophical concept of Roman law, as it's come down to us, is that all of our rights depend upon and are given to us by the state. And of course, that is also where the sort of human rights regime of the European Convention on Human Rights, it's the same. It says you've got this grand right to, for instance, freedom of expression, but that's granted to you, and then there's all sorts of exceptions. So if you're going to say anything that the state doesn't really like, then you could be in trouble. And of course, that's exactly what happened during the whole COVID emergency. Because suddenly we found that actually we hadn't got any rights at all. We hadn't even got the right to leave our houses if the state didn't give us permission to do so. And the courts and the human rights side of the argument completely failed us, as did the church and all the institutions that you had thought, perhaps, if you believed that we lived in a liberal democracy, then all of those failed us.
It's interesting, isn't it? As we talk about this, we'll go into it more in a second. We look at what's happening throughout Europe. We hear that Pam Bondi says that they're going to make sure they get rid of hate speech and stuff like that, so it becomes censorship. Then we have in Australia all the shenanigans the government is doing with digital ID and e-safety and all that sort of stuff. It truly is not about safety, it's about control. But it's interesting how they're all coming together now. They're all heading towards a pointy end. And not being a doomsday soothsayer by any stretch, but they are building up and becoming collectively very strong in controlling the mass population, aren't they?
Mike, they're certainly aiming to do that. I think one of the sort of counter possibilities is that actually that what we're getting here is the sort of culmination of where all the establishments were headed towards. But they were headed towards that partly because they thought that that's what our sort of, as it were, imperial masters in America wanted. And so it was part of being a client state of the American imperium, in a sense, that we were supposed to be becoming multiculturalist, globalist, all the various things that the Americans were talking up, and one of those is the whole concept of international law, which really was being applied really only in the interests of what Americans were saying that they wanted. And the fact is, of course, that the Americans have seemingly very strongly turned their back on all that. So it may be that what we're seeing is the sort of the last blooms, as it were, of the old order and what they were trying to do. But it may be that things are going to turn against them. So I mean, in in the UK, one of the things that's been very clear, we've had now three conferences of the major parties. We've had the Liberal Democrats, Labour, and then the Conservatives, all of them waving the flag and making out that they are patriotic. And the more they've done that, the more the insurgency party under Reform and Nigel Farage has their standing has gone up in the polls. So I think they are. We're seeing a sort of decayed. This is the sort of final moment before the decay becomes unstoppable and obviously taking over. And I think we are at a point where we're getting a sort of turn coming forward. I don't know whether you feel the same is true in Australia, but I do feel that the system we've got now has made us all aware of its hostile intent towards us as the people of our country. So in England, the English, lots of people in England are now aware that the British state is really to be ranked as an enemy of the English nation.
The
And they seem to be working against us.
Well, they are. I mean, this is appalling, but it's not just happening in the UK. It's happening right around the world, and that's why I keep saying it's the dismantling or the end of, in many ways, Western civilization, because it was always based on the things they are dismantling at this stage. The Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. It's the end of homeschooling, isn't it?
And that's certainly one of the intents. As I said, it is about control. And as often happens with Acts of Parliament, there are all sorts of details in there, many of which will play out in a way that is not being discussed at all in Parliament, and will be used for things that nobody imagined when it was being talked about, that was actually going to happen. And I mean, I'll give you another, for instance, of that. We've got an Act of Parliament called the Terrorism Act, and people would obviously think that's going to be about people trying to blow others up or shoot people, or in other words, use terror tactics against the population to try and achieve political ends. Well, one of the main ways in which that's been used is that if a police officer asks you to give the code to your computer or your mobile phone and you refuse to do so, then you are guilty of an offence under the Terrorism Act. And Tommy Robinson's coming up for trial on exactly that issue next week.
It's some of this stuff you would, if somebody had said this to us, say 15, 20 years ago, and you had a few drinks under your belt, you'd laugh at them. But now it's horrendous. Tell me you mentioned the Tories, the Conservatives. They had their get together. I would imagine it was a two-man tent. But what are they? Are they up in arms? I mean, you probably count all the members or all the members probably on one hand. But are they jumping up and down because they're part to blame for this whole fiasco, aren't they?
Oh yes, I mean David Cameron in particular was keen to project himself and the Conservative Party as the heirs to Blair. So they're a Blair party of centre left, of mass immigration, of multiculturalism, of diversity, equality, and inclusion, of LGBTQ rights. And that applies to every aspect of the state, including the armed services. Our one of our leading generals, General Naismith, who's the highest-ranking woman in the army, she reckons that the most important thing that could happen in the British Army is controlling microaggressions. And that it's important to make sure that nobody's nasty to each other in what they say. And that's more important, obviously, than learning how to kill the enemies of the state, which you might
Yeah.
think would be the actual role of an army.
I try to keep a straight face and almost got to it. I mean, it's like the who's the general, the guy in charge of the defense mob in the US? What was his name? Anyway, he said, no, we would never surprise attack China. We would let them know first. I mean, what a great general. And I think he must be related to Custer. Um, Tell me about this, because we often knock, and very unkindly too, by the way, and more on your part, by the way. So I have to remind you, you have to be kinder to mainstream media. They would have been up in arms over this, wouldn't they? They'd be talking about our rights being eroded and that families being butted out. Tell me exactly the positive things that mainstream media is saying about how bad this is for the UK.
So mainly the mainstream media are not reporting it. But to the extent that they do report it, it's a good move, of course, and it's in the interests of children.
That's
And
terrible.
we don't get contrary narratives. The BBC said that they redefined the idea of impartiality some while ago, and one of the things that impartiality means is that they're not going to report contrary narratives, and contrary narratives are anything that's undermining of multiculturalism,
Mm.
diversity, equality, LGBTQ plus rights.
Oh my
So
God.
it is the mainstream media has become in England very much a propaganda.
It has, but it
Or,
always has been for a long time. Just that now,
yeah,
the narrative is so different from either side. And when I say either side, I don't mean I'm right and you're wrong, and then they say I'm right, you're wrong. There's one side that just wants to go back to as it was. You have a right to say what you want to say. You have a right to disagree, and you have a right. All these sort of normal things which are being eroded. And look at Mahmood. I mean, soon you'll be criticising Islam, and you can do that. You can call Christianity whatever you like, but if it gets to Islam, you'll go straight to jail. And again, that's the whole thing is just nuts. Speaking of Islam, tell us about your any more on halal.
yes. Could I just finish off with what you were saying about the Islamophobia thing? Because I think we've had a sort of demonstration of where that's going to go. Really, it's not strictly speaking about Islamophobia, although interestingly, it's the Sikhs who are leading the charge against the Islamophobia idea that Labour's come up with. Um, but we've just had these convictions and sentencing of three men who were involved in the protests in Epping over the illegal immigrants in the hotel and the Bell Inn, rising out of a sexual assault on a underage girl by Muslim man who had just arrived in the country. Um, and it turns out that they've received much stiffer sentences for protest, um, which and the protests got they got they got a little bit out of hand, but they mainly got out of hand because Essex police stirred them up, and they introduced the counter protesters right into the centre of what had previously been a completely peaceful demonstration. And these three guys wound up getting much stiffer sentences for protesting than the original sexual predator got for his sexual assault on an underage girl.
That's nuts.
And the reasoning is um, coming back to both Mahbub and Halal. The reasoning was that, of course, that they were motivated by racial or sexual or religious hostility in protesting, and that means that you get thumped with a much bigger sentence. And that, of course, will happen with Islamophobia. Islamophobia will be fitted into the concept of racial or religious aggravation, and therefore a multiplier on what happens with your sentence. And as far as halal is concerned, of course, the fact that the British state has allowed this to develop and has not adequately or properly sought to police the rules that are actually there in black and white for the way that animals should be killed in commercial slaughter. That's all been allowed to be completely flouted. Is again a really bad example and a very clear one of two-tier policing. And obviously we need to make sure that that no longer can go on.
I'm just thinking, imagine if Benny Hill was alive, he would have been put on the terrorist watch list.
Yes,
And we laugh at it.
we're hardly ever allowed to see any Benny Hill these days.
Oh, I often play him at times just to be, but I'm over here. I'll have won't be a hello, hello, hello. It'll be g'day, g'day, g'day. But they'll want to have a chat to me, I'm sure. And I mean, we even in WA in Western Australia, the sovereign citizens, they raided a whole bunch of their homes. And these are farmers and stuff, and they all have guns, and they confiscated all those guns. And yes, there was a sovereign citizen that killed two policemen in Victoria, but it doesn't mean the whole lot of them are going to kill people. It's just that you had a bad guy. It's the same thing in society. You know, there are bad people, but your laws, I have to say, what's happening? It's so un-England like. So it's not British, is it?
Well, it's certainly not what our ancestors would have thought of as British, or even people would have thought of 30, 40 years ago as British. And one of the interesting things there is, Mike, that the British state that's trying to impose all these un-British things has developed a definition of British values, which they're either the sort of values that you couldn't object to, like democracy and the rule of law, or they are values that would simply not have been recognised as being British a few years ago.
Mm.
So we are very much in the stage where faith, flag, and family are being attacked.
They are, and at this stage, they at least will win this battle, I do believe. But whether they win the war, it's up to the backbone of all your citizens. Whether they
people need to stand up and be counted when it comes to this. We
and
need
it's
to
very scary. I mean, but in fairness, Robin, it's scary too to be confronted with with government, whether it's law enforcement or other areas. They have the might of the entire UK government behind them. You have the might of your wife behind you, and hopefully she's It's going to keep pushing you forward, because otherwise it's scary. It's a very scary, scary thing. So, we don't. Anybody that is upset but is a bit nervous about doing things, you have to do something. But at the same time, we understand it's a very scary thing, and everyone's brave from outside the fence. Get inside that yard. It's a different pot of what is it called? Kettle of fish. That's what it is.
Just a bit.
Now, if somebody wants to find out more about you, Robin, or be part of the great halal hunt. Sorry, I like that. How do they do that?
Yes, so we've got the appeal is on Twitter. So if you look at me, look at my Twitter account at Robin Tilbrook, then you can see the appeal, or you can go to the English Democrats site, englishdemocrats.party, or the Workers of England Union, workersofengland.co.uk.
Always a pleasure. I look forward to these conversations. Robin Tilbrook, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Matt.
With the latest information and analysis of major events from around the world, this is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome back again. I'm Mike Ryan. My guest is John Sleigh, editor of The Scottish Farmer. John, thanks for joining us. Tell me how tough it is for farmers on the land, because you've been involved in journalism for such a long time, even though you look younger, of course, but for a long time. Have you ever seen it as bad as it is at the moment?
Well, at the moment, we've got farmers across the country that are facing quite a difference in climate. We see quite a wet west coast of Scotland, or western side, and it's been quite dry in the summer. And we've had sort of challenges around that with yields been down a little bit in the east side of the country. The west side's quite a nice summer. We've had quite good growing conditions. And to be honest, commodity prices are fairly strong. So I think profitability is back in a number of areas. There's reasonably strong situations with land prices. But of course, hanging over all this is the inheritance tax debacle that Westminster introduced last October. That's kind of put a sour note on where we're going to go in the long term.
Yeah, obviously the government, like most governments around the world, they don't actually understand what the farming community is like. Tell us about, because you were involved in reporting on Irish issues, and then now in Scotland. Is there much of a difference between Ireland and Scotland and the issues they face? And what about how can we fix it? How can we, one, I would imagine just tell government to go away. But other than that, how can we make it a more secure and better business environment? Because you mentioned the weather, and always plays an issue. But the issues at the moment are government, and they're the ones that are the greatest threat to farming throughout not only the UK but throughout most of the world. How do we address that and get around it and win?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was interesting. Last week I was listening to a talk from a scientist who was talking very much on the climate change and the vegan debate about meat eating and meat consumption. Obviously, in the UK, meat production is quite an important element of our farming systems. Same across in Ireland. Ireland's a very heavily meat export country. And they were saying that the biggest challenge will be with politicians and those who are sort of making a lot of the high-powered decisions about where we go and in the climate debate and where we go on recommendations for meat consumption. The actual solution is with the public. An awful lot of them are eating a reasonable amount of meat across the world, and particularly when we have so many more people in in Africa and Asia who are getting richer all the time. They're looking to have more protein into their diet, and that means that we're going to have to feed them. And a lot of the debate about cutting down on meat production is a challenge because so many people are looking for highly nutritious, nutrient-dense foods like beef, lamb, and pork.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine going into a McDonald's or to a burger place and having a vegetarian burger. I mean, nothing against people who love vegetarian burgers, but you got to have your meat patty, don't you? And this is where I find government to be quite stupid. I mean, all the things they're doing to combat, inverted commas, climate change, the crisis that we had to have, and whether it's real, that's another thing. But to stop cows with bovine and stuff like that, stop them from passing wind. And I mentioned this a couple of times today. It's about 0.00% or 0.03% of the damage they're creating or the emissions that they're creating for planet Earth. It's not an overreaction. It's just basically a lie. Why would they be, unless they want control, why would they be placing such restraints on farmers and the health of cattle and dairy and stuff for the sake of climate change, knowing full well that most of it is just all lies?
Well, it's a challenge because an awful lot of the science is incredibly complicated, and farmers don't
Mm.
have time to really digest all of that. It's a full-time job keeping up with the science, let alone trying to keep a farm running. And they do feel under the cosh and persecuted for what they're trying to do. And an awful lot of farmers essentially are doing the same as what their parents and grandparents did in their production systems. The only difference is they're doing it a lot more efficiently and have the ability to feed an awful lot more people per farm. So where a generation ago you'd have 8 people on a farm and they'd feed a village. Now you have 3 people and they would feed a town. And unfortunately, with 7 billion people on the planet, and we want to keep feeding them, we're going to have to keep up with these production systems, and the alternatives are not there. We can't simply switch, particularly in places like Scotland or the UK and Ireland. We can't switch from livestock to beans, pulses, lentils at the same scale to be able to feed the same number of people. There is a real challenge coming forward on how we manage to maintain producing food and keeping the planet safe, or saving the planet as people would like to be. There's a lot of work in this area. We're
Mm.
doing of stuff about how to become more efficient. Obviously, an efficient farm is a more climate friendly farm, and we are looking at trying to reduce inputs and various sort of smart thinking. But essentially, if you have 7 billion people on the planet, we're going to have to feed them somehow. And doing that in a zero carbon environment is impossible.
Now, I'm just thinking the a farm's going to become bigger because the smaller ones will go out of business.
Well, that's been the trend for 200 years. I mean, we've seen, if you go back in history, farms were always historically smaller, right back to in the UK with a feudal system. You would have relatively small patches of land, and people were often in subsistence on themselves. So every generation, farms get a little bit bigger. They buy the neighbour's farm, someone retires, and we've been, as an industry, farmers have been exporting people for hundreds of years, and they go to the towns. And 200 years ago, it was the cotton mills and all the various other shipyards and all that sort of stuff. Now is no different. It's just the pace of acceleration that's changed because of mechanization, because of new genetics, because of, at the moment, how AI is going to influence things. We could see that pace of change happening even quicker, because if a 40-acre farm becomes an 80-acre farm, it's still a relatively modest area. But when a 3,000-acre farm becomes a 6,000-acre farm, it's still that same 100% increase in size, but you're now really starting to restrict the number of people who are working on the land and the scale, which comes with its own dangers with how you manage to maintain rural communities, how you manage to retain labour. People still need to work on it, but you're not owning the farm. You're having to do that in a labour, having to pay for it. And food essentially is a global commodity in so many ways. That means that you're competing with a lot of countries that have much more relaxed labour rules and a lot lower average payments for labour as well. So there's a lot of challenges facing farmers at the moment.
Just thinking about the regen farming. We've had a gentleman on tonight, or this afternoon, talking about regen farming. Do you think it has a future, or do you think perhaps it's great as a micro farm, good for a smaller industry, but farming itself needs to be big, boisterous, bustling, and all that sort of stuff?
Well, I think regen depends for your interpretation of regen. I'm still to see an absolute definition of what regen means. And I would argue that a lot of the stuff they're talking about regen is just good farming practice. And a lot of farmers, whether you're huge or small, do the same thing. We all respect the soil. We all have to make sure we put back into the soil whatever you take out. And whether that's done inorganically through a fertilizer, or whether it's done organically through a manure or a muck coming from a livestock product, it's all doing the same things. It's all science, it's all based on the same ground. So I think regen probably is going to be maybe a niche thing for smaller guys if they want to brand their production up that way and maybe sell a product that's regen, or it's got some sort of environmental label. However, I would argue that the principles are across the board, and all farmers who produce food from it's sunshine, it's soil, it's plants, it's animals. It's pretty simple stuff, and it's the same principles whether it's small or large.
The issues with Scottish farming compared to say, other parts of the UK.
Yeah.
Is there much of a difference, or is it still?
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Scotland, the difference between Scotland and England, the simplest way to describe it is that Scotland, about 80 to 85% can only produce cows and sheep because of the mountain, the beautiful countryside that Scotland is world renowned for, is
Mhm,
also a challenge in how to produce food because those mountains and those beautiful green hills can't grow carrots, cauliflowers, cabbages. And we
mhm,
are the inverse to England. England's probably about 15% hills and livestock area. However, they have the ability to grow, hundreds of thousands of hectares of wheat and barley and grain and vegetables and hops and all sorts of stuff. Whereas we have some really fertile ground down the east coast and some great dairy ground in the southwest. But we do have a challenge with our climate. We're quite far north. We have quite a lot of rain, which increasingly in the future probably is going to be a benefit, but historically means that overwintering cattle outside can be difficult because the ground conditions are too wet. So yeah, geography wise, Scotland's quite a challenge to produce food. But I mean, we've done it for hundreds of years. We could keep 1 million people in this country 200 years ago through the food we produced, and and the modern technology, we can keep an awful lot more.
could they diversify the crops that you could grow on the side of mountains, or is it just too hard?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is a little bit of crop diversification. I think for the majority of Scotland, it's going to be cattle and sheep, and maybe a little bit of crops on the flat ground at the bottom of the valley or wherever you're the glen where you are. But predominantly, I don't think there's an awful lot of change. The diversification, sadly, from a farming perspective, is going into trees. A lot of these areas will, instead of having sheep or cattle, they'll be growing trees, which will be producing timber for biomass or for the construction industry or various other things. Further down the hill, yes, we're seeing a little bit of growth in beans coming further north in the country. You see, like fava beans or broad beans being grown more for a protein crop for feeding into livestock production, and then a little bit more maize further at the very south of the country. But yeah, we are restricted in the things we can grow just through geography. But I mean, every country is the same. I mean, you can't
Mm.
grow bananas up here, but you can't grow wheat in the tropics.
You look at around the world. I mean, you have in Australia got a lot of sheep and cattle, citrus and stuff like that. I always think of Scotland's main crop as Scotch, and I really, really think it's a magnificent industry, and I would think more of it because it's pretty expensive down under. Let me tell you. I mean, with all the, I mean, does farming there, does it suit, I was half frivolous before, but does it suit distilleries and because a lot of
Yes.
the, so it
Yeah.
does suit it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we grow 500,000 hectares of sprit malting barley, which is into the malting trade, which will be either for high export whiskey. It'll also be for domestic grain whiskey or even beer, lager, and that sort of stuff. And yeah, we have an exceptionally good climate to be able to produce the grain that's spot on for
Mm,
producing the
right.
malt that we're world famous for. I mean, it is. This year's been a bit of a challenge. We've seen, because of the growing conditions, we have quite a few smaller seeds. So this is getting quite technical, but you want a uniform seed size, lots of nice big plump barley seeds. We've had quite a few smaller ones this year because it's been quite a dry summer. But yeah, we are best placed, I would argue, in the world to produce the grain to be malted to then turn it into the world famous whiskies that we have and we are so proud of. Let's hope Donald Trump doesn't whack on more tariffs, which has had a real impact. Confidence around the world on the ability to export. There was a very stable market, but yeah, exporting that and oil and gas would be the two big
Mm.
exports from Scotland.
Now, you just send the whiskey to Australia. Let me tell you, if they could just reduce the price a bit, not your fault, it's their government. It's like a honeypot to them. But I have to say, it's if I was to go to heaven, it would be in probably Lapthrog around there, with the beautiful distilleries there. And I think was it the Isle of Skye? Is that what it is, or?
Well, there's a few. There's one whiskey. But the world's famous island is ISL as well. Island has lots, about four or five distilleries that are on that island, and it's one of the few islands in Scotland that can grow quite a bit of grain. And historically, they've been growing more grain. Most of our islands have got quite a sharp relief quite pointy, and they don't have the sort of area that can grow the grain. Whereas where I am in Aberdeenshire, this is really the heart of the malting barley sector, where you'll see an awful lot of people will be growing for the grain trade, and it's always a battle around harvest time about whether they've managed to get the right specification to produce the best whiskey. And one of the interesting facts about it is actually Scotch does not need to have grain produced in Scotland. The vast majority of it is from Scotland, but because they imported grain 150 years ago from the continent when they were a bit short, there's always the option to ensure that grain can come in from abroad to produce Scots whisky.
So we'll never get thirsty.
No, we'll never get thirsty. We've got water and grain, and as long as we've got peat or some sticks to burn to malt the barley and boil it up, we'll be fine.
It's God's gift, let me tell you. But too much of that, because we got back to some serious stuff. What about food security? Do you think it's becoming a bigger issue?
It's certainly up the agenda politically. They're talking about food security. The Ukraine war caused a real scare. The spike in food costs, the cost of, oil, which linked into cooking oils, which linked into protein costs, caused a real fear. We had, big increase for farmers, but prices they were getting from the farm gate. However, a big rise in cost, the fertilizer cost, energy cost, the amount of cost to fill your tractor up with diesel, and I think that scared people around the world to be able to close the draw, close your ability to feed your own nation. Unfortunately, in places like the UK, we have 70 million people on a relatively small island, so we will never and haven't been able to feed ourselves for a long, long time. We are, under 50% relevant on our own food production, and depending on the foodstuffs, even I think it's about 70% of what we could produce is produced in the UK, and we have so many different competing land uses. So yeah, it's a big issue. Farmers would love to be able to produce more, but in a relatively small island, we do struggle to be able to produce enough to feed our nation. And also, diets have changed. When you look at the typical diet, they're eating a lot of foods that a lot of Australians would love eating and be able to grow themselves. We have avocados or mangoes or oranges. And of course, that's not an option to grow here. And people expect to have these foodstuffs 12 months of the year. They expect to be able to see strawberries for Valentine's Day. Whereas if you have ever tried to grow strawberries yourself in the Northern Hemisphere, you're not going to get anywhere near them on Valentine's Day. But it's become a thing, and supermarkets, the customer's always right, driving the price down, are making sure that the customer gets those strawberries for the 14th of February.
Fantastic. And a whiskey, by the way, too. Tell me about the Scottish Farmer, your newspaper. I mean, tell us its history.
Yeah. Well,
And
we've been running 130 years, the Scottish Farmer. It's the oldest publication in the country on farming. We cover all the various news, both local and international. We'll cover quite a few stories on Australia. We're always very interested about the sheep trade over there. Your ability to export beef and lamb is very impressive, and also to get technical, your grading system and how you grade your cattle is something that we're always very curious about, and how you're able to consistently prove that your beef's going to be very tasty. But the Scottish Farmer, we cover a lot of our agricultural shows. Scotland's got one of the healthiest show sector in the country, so all summer we have a lot of shows with cattle and sheep going around the ring and getting prizes, lots of awards. And then we have a very, very strong pedigree sector. So we look to be able to tell exactly who the top priced cattle and sheep are, and also to give technical notes on farmers on how they can improve their yields and cover the politics, which is, as you know, a daily job to make sure we can keep people aware of what's happening.
you're a scribble master. You like to write. Have you ever been a farmer? Could you ever be a farmer?
Yeah, well, I'm from a family farm up here. My brother and my dad farm up here. Becoming a farmer is very challenging. Every year the price of land goes up. The rental agreement's very tricky. But yeah, I mean, most of our team are from a farm. Right? When
Mm.
you write about farming, you need to really
Mm.
understand the industry. My argument is we can teach people to write, but teaching them about farming will take a whole lifetime. So if they're born into it, if they've worked in the industry, we can take them on board and they can write for us quite easily. But if you've not got an experience of how farming work and how family farms particularly work, it is a real challenge to understand what makes the whole industry tick.
Yeah, we in Australia, farmers and love them dearly. And having been from a farming community, we whinge, we complain a lot. Do they do the same? Do they do
Yeah,
this in Scotland?
Absolutely. It's always with a wry smile when you hear a farmer who is complaining about how terrible the conditions are, how prices are terrible, how they're never going to be able to go, and then you just ask them, "You've been doing this for 5 generations, have you? And you're 70 years old. I assume you've been through quite challenging times in the past, and you're going to be here for your son and your grandsons in time. So, despite their moans, they are incredibly resilient as an industry, and they have the ability to weather some really tough times, as evident. If you've been doing something for 100 years, you know how to do it, and it's incredibly impressive. You just have to understand that perhaps they're just letting off steam.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing occupation, industry, lifestyle. I always tell the story. I might as well tell you too. I lived on an orchard. We grew oranges and all avocados and stuff like that. And right out front of our house, around the house, we're surrounded by orange trees. And when I was a kid, I would hop in the car and drive down to the local shop to buy a carton of orange juice because the thought of picking anything was too scary. So I was a very bad farmer. But let me tell you, if we had a distillery nearby, I would have been in it, rolled up my sleeves, and in it like Flynn, as we would say. So, wrong industry, wrong part of the world. But I just admire farmers. I think they are the backbone of all countries. If somebody wants to find out more about your publication, The Scottish Farmer, just quickly, website, and how do they do that?
Yeah, just go and search for the Scottish Farmer on your search engine of choice or Facebook. We have 100,000 followers on Facebook. Just search for the Scottish Farmer and you'll find out all our daily posts are on there available.
Yeah, look, I would like to say I'll have a drink for you tonight. You'll have one for me, I would imagine, but I have to wait till the weekend because I do give it a nudge sometimes. So I'm a bit Scottish, just love Scotch and the Scottish people because they made mother's milk. It's fantastic. John Sleigh, thank you very much. This is The World Today.